Cheating allegations, brutal knockouts, players labelled as criminals, and endless dirty hits. This is the fiercest rivalry in NFL history. Two teams that absolutely hated each other. The 70s Steelers and Raiders. The rivalry between the Steelers and Raiders, specifically during the 1970s, is an old school tale of a deep-rooted hatred between two teams. A hatred that runs so deep, is as strong as it was 50 years ago. So how did this rivalry begin? And why was it prevalent for so long? Let's rewind the clock and start where it all began. This is the game that it all began. The game that would torture Raiders ad infinitum. The game that converted Pittsburgh into a football town and turned decades of disappointment into a dynasty. Up until this point, the Steelers weren't that great. They had never won a playoff game. Mind you, they had only been to one game in its 39-year history, where they lost to the Eagles in 1947. The Steelers' trajectory changed when they hired Chuck Noll in 1969. He built a foundation for winning, but great things take time. In his first 3 seasons, Noll went 12-30. He drafted well though, with selections such as Joe Green and L.C. Greenwood in 1969. In 1970, he brought quarterback Mel Blount and quarterback Terry Bradshaw. And in 1972, he drafted running back Franco Harris. The Raiders joined the AFL in 1960. It took some time for them to start winning, but in 1967, they went 14-1 and went to Super Bowl II, but fell short against the mighty Packers. In that same year, the Steelers finished 11-3 and made the playoffs. The Raiders awaited, led by coach John Madden. The playoff game would be a tough defensive battle, foreshadowing many of that decade. I don't want to get into the controversy about the catch itself. This is the so-called immaculate reception game. I did a separate video on that, but one thing's for sure, this play sprouted a heated rivalry that was at its peak during the 1970s when both teams were among the best in the league. In the fourth quarter, the Raiders were down. Madden subbed in quarterback Kenny the Snake Stabler to replace Darryl LaMonica, and this turned out to be the right choice, as Stabler would get the Raiders a 7-6 lead in the final minutes. With only 22 seconds left, Terry Bradshaw dropped back to pass and was immediately under heavy pressure. He scrambled to the right and heaved one deep to back John Fuca. What happened next will forever be a matter of controversy. The ball might have deflected off Fuca's hands or knocked away by Jack Tatum. Regardless, it appeared to be an incomplete pass. However, just before the ball touched the ground, running back Franco Harris came out of nowhere, scooped it up, and ran into the end zone. It took the rest 15 minutes, but they ultimately declared it a touchdown. The Steelers would go on to the championship game and fall short of the Super Bowl, but nonetheless, it started this rivalry and changed the trajectory of the Steelers, and sowed the seeds for a Steelers dynasty. The Raiders didn't have to wait long for revenge. In 1973, they won 33-14, rushing for 232 yards against the Steel Curtain defense, while the Steelers only rushed for 65 yards. For the third year in a row, they met in the postseason in 1974. The Steelers were fired up after an intense pre-game speech by Noll. He referenced John Madden's comment that the NFL's 2 best teams just played, after the Raiders' victory over the Miami Dolphins the previous week. The game didn't start out well for the Steelers, as Lim fumbled a punt return, setting up the Raiders at the Steelers' 28-yard line. However, the Steel Curtain defense managed to hold the Raiders to just a field goal. Throughout the game, the Steelers' defense would step up. Jack Lambert blocked a field goal, and Jack Ham intercepted 2 passes, one of which led to a touchdown. JT Thomas intercepted a pass from Ken Stabler with just over a minute remaining, sealing the victory for the Steelers. The Steelers would win 24-13 and would go on to win their first of many Super Bowls. They met again in the 1975 AFC Championship game, and the bad blood only got thicker after head coach Chuck Noll accused Raiders owner Al Davis of sending spies to the Steelers practices. On game day, Al Davis fired back, accusing Noll of allowing the artificial turf at the Steelers stadium to freeze. Another major event during this game, George Atkinson leveled Lynn Swann, and Swann was knocked out and suffered a concussion. He had to be carried off by teammate Joe Green. The conditions were rough, with wind chills of -1 degree Fahrenheit and several inches of snow on the ground. The Raiders in particular were not used to such extreme weather conditions. John Madden noted, "The ice made it tough for our receivers because we use them for turning and cutting and working their way back to the ball. A lot of times when we thought we had something going, we couldn't use those things." Again, both defenses played tough. Jack Tatum intercepted Bradshaw twice in the first quarter. Both teams were held scoreless, with the score tied at 0-0 until the second quarter. Mike Wagner's diving interception set up a 36-yard field goal, giving the Steelers a 3-0 lead. There were plenty of turnovers, including a Raiders fumble by Marv Hubbard, leading to a Steelers touchdown. In the final moments, a 41-yard field goal kick brought the Raiders within 6 points at 16-10. The Raiders then actually recovered the onside kick, but with only seconds left, a 37-yard pass from Stabler to Cliff Branch was tackled in bounds, so time expired. They'd meet again in the 1976 season opener, where the rivalry would be in full display. In this game, safety George Atkinson leveled Lynn Swann with a forearm to the base of the helmet, 15 yards away from the play. That hit led Chuck Noll to call out the Raiders, saying, "You have a criminal element in all aspects of society. Apparently, we have it in the NFL too. Maybe we have a law and order problem." The NFL commissioner fined Atkinson $1,500 for the play and Noll $1,000 for his comments. In 1997, Atkinson filed a $2 million libel lawsuit against Noll and the Steelers for comments he felt slandered his reputation. Noll would win the lawsuit, but he did have to admit under oath that some of his own players could fall under the quote criminal element label he used against Raiders players, and that was certainly true. In that same game, Jack Lambert made this vicious play where he basically power drived a Raiders receiver, cliff branch headfirst into the ground. So these cases of physicality, maybe even violence, were what made this rivalry so unique. They played tough, they hated each other, and they wanted to leave it all on the field. Sometimes players might have taken that too far, but that's all part of the game. But getting back to that game, the Steelers dominated early, leading 28-14, after Rocky Blythe's lateral to Franco Harris set up a crucial touchdown. With 6 minutes left, a fumble by the Steelers allowed Ken Stabler to drive the Raiders for a touchdown, narrowing the score to 28-21. The Steelers went 3 and out, and a short punt set up the Raiders in good field position. On a crucial 4th and 10, Stabler avoided a sack and connected with Branch, who brought the ball to the Steelers' 2-yard line. Stabler then scored on a naked bootleg, tying the game. In the final minute, Terry Bradshaw's pass was blocked and intercepted by Raiders linebacker Willie Hall. The Raiders ran down the clock and kicked a field goal for a dramatic 31-28 victory. They go on to meet for the 5th year in a row in the postseason. Suffering from injuries, the Steelers entered the game without starting running backs Franco Harris and Rocky Blythe. The Raiders defense controlled the field, holding the Steelers to 7 points. In the second quarter, Raiders linebacker Willie Hall returned an interception to the 1-yard line, which was converted, giving the Raiders a 10-0 lead. The Raiders won 24-7 and went on to win their first Super Bowl, beating the Vikings 32-14. The Steelers and the fans believe that they would have won that game and the Super Bowl if their running backs Franco Harris and Rocky Blythe had not been injured. The Raiders argued it didn't matter. The defense was hot, and the Steelers' running game was held to 72 yards, and Harris and Blythe wouldn't have done much better because there simply was nowhere to run. The Steelers would get a chance for redemption in the second game of the 1977 regular season, with a newspaper in Pittsburgh stating, "This is the real AFC Championship game." I think that definitely fired up the Raiders, because again the Raiders contained the run, holding Harris to 64 yards and Blythe to 23. The Raiders came out on top 16-7, silencing the noise from the playoff game the year prior. In week 7 of 1980 in the regular season, the defending Super Bowl champion Steelers faced a seemingly disarrayed Raiders team, now led by quarterback Jim Plunkett. The Steelers took an early 10-0 lead, capitalizing on a Plunkett interception and a Kenny King fumble. The Raiders responded with a 27-yard touchdown run by King. The Steelers then responded with a score, making it 17-7. This game would go back and forth, but the Raiders managed to come up on top, winning 45-34. So both teams would continue to scrap it out for several more years, but as they entered the 80s, the rivalry was past its peak. As the teams got older, so did the rivalry. Legendary coaches, players, and fan bases would create this historic rivalry. Both teams played extremely physical, often too physical, but that's part of what made it so great. There have been few rivalries as intense as the Raiders vs Steelers, and it will be forever etched in NFL lore. Alright, thanks for watching.